Greetings and welcome back to PhotoJoseph's Photo Moment, the Q&A portion of today's show, where we try to A, your Q's about what we just talked about, which was Lightroom CC's latest June 2018 update, or, well, anything else you want to talk about, because that's what we do in the show. All right, let's see here. Let me pull up the comments. We've got James Millington from the UK. Hello, you have a question about autofocus. The questions do not have to be related to the topic of today. You can ask anything you want. When I select tracking in autofocus, okay, I lock onto an object, but then it locks onto everything else. Is there another setting I need to change? Okay, I'm assuming that you're talking about what I like to call the missile lock, where you have a kind of a box with crosshairs on it. You point that at your subject, you push the button halfway to lock track on it, and ideally, it holds that subject. So imagine your kid running across the lawn, or a skateboarder, cyclist, whatever, something that is moving in the scene and moving reasonably unpredictably. The way that this feature works is that you need to position the cursor over what it is you want to lock. So let's just say that I'm photographing a person, running, and we've got our frame this wide, and I want them to be off to the side of the frame. Great. Well, I need to first position that crosshair over their face or some part of their being, some part of the object that is nicely high contrast and unlikely to blend into the background. That's your first key. You want to find something that's really obviously unique to that subject. You position the camera over them, you push halfway, and you'll see if it's successful. I think it flashes green. I don't remember. If it's unsuccessful, it'll like flash red or something and you're done. But if it's successful, it will lock on and suddenly that crosshair will follow the subject around. And at that point, you can just go ahead and shoot and shoot and shoot, and it's going to hold on to them in focus until they either move out of frame. And actually, if they move out of frame briefly and come back in, the cameras will often reacquire them, which is pretty awesome. But if they're out too long, it forgets. Or if something changes too much, sometimes it just loses it. If it loses it, then you have to repeat it. You just basically point that crosshair back at them again, hit it again, reacquire, and off you go. So that focus tracking is not easy. It definitely takes some getting used to. It takes some practice. So before you use it on a real event, I would say go out and even just photograph cars driving by. Sit on the street corner and grab cars driving by and get used to grabbing that subject quickly. Imagine you've got racers running by and you're trying to get that really important person. You're trying to capture them. It takes practice. It definitely does. But that's essentially how it works. So give it a try. See if you can get it working better for you. But there's nothing else you have to change in your settings. It's just getting used to how it works. Reed Nolan says, I'm wondering how you would expose your interviews when shooting log. Okay. Typically, I'd set zebras at 75, but if you pull up on the highlights of the gamma curve, you'll be overexposed. Okay. I'm going to do a whole show probably pretty soon about exposing for log because it is very specific. I was actually going to do it last week and I started setting up and I realized there's a few more things I wanted to do to prep for it. But when you're shooting for log, yes, you're right. And I'll just answer this briefly, so I'm not going to explain the whole thing for those who don't understand log shooting. For that, we'll wait for the future show. But in general, yes, zebras at 75 are good, but remember, zebras are your maximum peak. It doesn't mean that you set whatever your brightest thing is to 75 natively. That is your clipping point. So if you have white clouds in the sky that you want to retain texture on, that's your clipping point. If you have specular highlights, you don't care if those get clipped off because they're going to be gone anyway. Watch the waveform. The waveform is really, really critical. Make sure that things like the faces, the clouds, things like that are not getting peaks or not clipping and going above the threshold. In general, with log, you want to shoot bright. We always say when shooting raw to shoot to the right. That is the same thing for shooting log. Shoot to the right, because if it's a little bit bright, as long as you're not clipping, you can pull the exposure down so that your face, your clouds, everything look the way that they should, and your shadows get pushed darker, and that way you're not introducing noise. With log, if you shoot low and raise it up, you're going to bring a whole lot of noise into the picture. So with log, you always want to shoot bright without clipping. Pretty much just like shooting raw. Shoot bright, shoot to the right, shoot bright, and pull it down in post. And again, we'll do a full video on that later. Vixes, hi, says, would you recommend using A mode instead of creative video mode on GH5? Okay, so, well, technically creative video mode is just when you rotate the dial into the movie mode. It's called creative video mode. When you're saying use A mode, I don't know if you mean aperture priority and then pushing the record button. So on the GH5 and all of the Lumix cameras that have the creative video mode, the dedicated video dial, if you're in shutter priority for stills, if you're in shutter priority, aperture priority, manual, whatever, when you push the little red button, it essentially is using the settings that your camera is currently set to. So with respect to something like shutter speed or shutter angle, if you're thinking that way, then if you happen to be shooting at a 200th of a second for your stills and you start recording video, it's going to record at that shutter speed. So you probably, if you want really precise control over video, you want to go into the creative movie mode. You want to go into that dedicated movie mode because then you can lock in your 60th of a second or your 180-degree shutter, leave that there permanently so that when you switch into that mode, that's where it is. So I personally almost never, ever, ever shoot video in a photo mode, just pushing on the red button. I almost always switch it over to video mode first. So you just get more control that way. That's essentially what it comes down to. Brad Edwards. Oh, I skipped your question. Sorry, Brad. Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay. Sorry about that. Brad Edwards says, I really only use Lightroom Classic. Okay. Is CC a lighter weight and faster overall program for basic editing? And what features would I potentially be missing in CC that may be important? Excellent, excellent question. Okay. So as I was explaining in the beginning, maybe I don't know if you were around for the beginning of the show, but Lightroom CC is a complete restart for Lightroom, right? Lightroom, what is now called Lightroom Classic, has been around for quite a while. It's been around for probably 10 years-ish or so. And it's old, right? It's got some legacy code in there that needs to be updated. And much like when Final Cut Pro went from Final Cut Pro 7 to Final Cut Pro 10, Adobe has decided that it is time to just start from scratch. Wipe the slate clean, start from scratch, start with all new, all fresh, all modern code. One of the big reasons for doing this, incidentally, is parity, feature parity across devices. When you can get an app that runs on your MacBook Pro or your Windows box and your iPad and your iPhone that does all this, your Android device, that do all the same things, that's kind of cool. And when the original code was written for the original Lightroom Classic, these devices didn't exist. So this is a whole new thing that they're suddenly trying to adapt to. So they started over. The intention, even though as far as I know, Adobe hasn't said this explicitly, but maybe they have, but if they haven't, it's totally obvious. The intention is to eventually eliminate what is now called Lightroom Classic. That will go away. They are still supporting it. They're even still adding features to it, but the emphasis is on Lightroom CC. Eventually, Lightroom CC will do everything that Classic does. Classic will go away. That I can guarantee. I don't have any verification. Like I said, I don't think they've actually said that explicitly, but that's clearly what's happening. Adobe nor any software company has any interest in supporting two completely separate tracks of the same app. So that will happen. As far as what features you're missing today, there's quite a few. So you have to decide whether what you have in Lightroom CC is enough for you. But things like geometry, that was a big one for me. I use the geometry features a lot in Lightroom. Lightroom CC did not originally have those. Now they do. They added that a while ago. The lift and stamp or copy and paste of settings that just got added that we showed here today in today's actual show, which incidentally, if you haven't seen, you want to watch that, although I don't know why you'd be here if you hadn't seen that. That is huge for me. That is a huge thing that allows me to use Lightroom CC, but not Classic. Where before I would have to use Classic. Things that I personally still have to go back to Classic for: profile creation using the Adobe ColorChecker, the X-Rite ColorChecker Passport. So that we talked about in the main show. That's something I cannot do in Lightroom CC right now because there's no plugin support. But that is obviously going to come at some point. Plugins are a huge part of the Adobe ecosystem, so that will be coming. But because you don't have that today, you don't have the ability to make a profile within there. That said, you can make a profile with their standalone app, the X-Rite standalone app, so maybe that one's not a big deal for you. But if there's other plugins that you use, whether Nik plugins or Luminar, Mac Funds plugins, or Skylum software is called plugins, or any of these other plugins that you're using, you can't do plugins inside of CC yet. So if that's an important part of your workflow, you can't do that yet. The ability to merge panoramas, stitch panoramas, or merge for HDR, those are two really significant ones that are not yet in CC. And those, for me personally, those are the biggies. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but those are the big ones. So they're getting less and less, right? Copy and paste of settings was a huge one. Now, check that off the list. Geometry was a huge one. We can now check that off the list. So there are more. And if you go to Adobe's website, just Google search Adobe Lightroom CC versus Adobe Lightroom Classic, you will find a list on Adobe's page that will show you side-by-side features, what are missing, what's not there. So you can look at that and decide what's important for you. So there you go. All right. Was there anything else in here? That was the last question to come up. Super. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in today. That was a lot of fun. Today's Wednesday. On Monday, last Monday, 2 days ago, I didn't do a live show because I was on the road. However, I did release a video about how to shoot and edit for Instagram TV, which I know a lot of you are going, vertical video? Are you kidding me? Well, it's here. Get used to it. It ain't going away. So I did a whole video on how to shoot for that, whether you should be shooting landscape and cropping or shooting vertical, and also how to edit that footage inside of Final Cut Pro. So if you're interested at all in IGTV, I do suggest you check out that video. I'll link to it up here. And of course, you can go to my Instagram account, go to PhotoJoseph on Instagram, and you can watch the little IGTV movie that I made. So that's that, folks. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in today. I appreciate it. We'll see you back here on Friday.